In this video, we will talk about social license to operate. Social license to operate refers to the acceptance of a company or industry's standard business practices by its employees, stakeholders, and the general public. The concept of social license is closely related to the concept of sustainability. Now, this definition may seem difficult to you, or you might not understand it totally. So, we will break down this definition and we will see the components of social license to operate so that you can understand the concept of social license to operate in a simple manner. Let's start with what is a license to operate. It is basically a grant or permission. The social license to operate, uh, basically the license to operate is a grant of permission to undertake a trade or business activity. And when we talk about CSR, that is corporate social responsibility, we often use the term license to operate in that context. So basically, we use the concept of license to operate to indicate the benchmark of behavior established for a company to gain recognition and acceptance in its surroundings. So, the benchmark of behavior is the minimum level of standard that a company has to maintain to obtain that license or to gain recognition and acceptance in its surroundings. Now, this license to operate, it is of two types. The first is regulatory license to operate and the second is social license to operate. Let us first understand what is a regulatory license to operate. So, a regulatory license to operate is usually used in a more formal sense. These are usually institutionalized licenses. By institutionalized, we mean that the licenses which have to be compulsorily obtained, they have to be necessarily obtained. You have to obtain them. It is not a choice. You need to do it to run your business or in order to do any kind of business activity in that area. So, and this regulatory license to operate has to be obtained from the licensing authorities. These licensing authorities could be regulatory bodies, supervisory committees, or state or national law and order bodies. There can be many more licensing authorities. So, if, for example, in India, you might want to obtain or you might have to obtain a permission from the National Green Tribunal in order to go ahead with a construction plan, with a huge construction plan. So these are necessary licenses that you have to obtain in order to run your company or business at a particular location. These are not optional. And the regulatory license to operate is used in a more formal sense. Now, let's talk about the social license to operate. So, this is where we have come to the topic of interest, that is social license to operate. This is what we are trying to understand through this video, through this chapter. So, firstly, it is also called social license. So, the term social license to operate and the term social license is used interchangeably in literature or in other places or even while we talk. So, whenever someone says social license, you should understand it as social license to operate. Social license to operate and social license are necessarily the same things. It refers to the acceptance of a company or industry's standard business practices. So, this is not as formal as a regulatory license, but it has a lot of importance, especially nowadays when people are becoming more aware of good business practices. And we will try to see that why this social license to operate is gaining importance in the mainstream, and why is it important for businesses to obtain this license, and how can they do it, what are the best practices. And this social license to operate is basically obtained from employees, stakeholders, and the general public. So basically, uh, it is somewhat like a public's opinion or perspective about a company or a business, uh, about their practices. So it is closely related to the concept of sustainability. So how is social license to operate related to sustainability? Let us try to understand. So the first thing that we need to understand, that it is slowly built and maintained over time. So when we were talking about the regulatory license to operate, we spoke about obtaining a formal license from a licensing authority. This is not similar to that. It is slowly built. This is not something that you can obtain in a limited amount of time, and it is not something which you can get obtain once and then you have the license for a lifetime. It has to be maintained over time. You cannot do something once and then not work on it later. So the first thing that we should understand is, it is slowly built and maintained over time. It takes a lot of time, patience, and a lot of thought, efforts to build a social license, and it has to be maintained. It is not a one time thing. And the company gains the trust of the stakeholders and the community. This Basically, the concept of social license to operate is related to the trust of the stakeholders and the community. How people, or the amount of trust that people associate with a company or a business practice. And basically, to gain this trust, what do the companies need to do? So firstly, the company needs to take care of their employees. So we talked that we spoke about how this social license needs to be obtained from employees, stakeholders, or the general public. So in order to obtain this social license from the employees, it is very obvious that you need to take care of your employees. And how can a company or a business take care of their employees? Basically, they can do so by by, for example, providing them a good working atmosphere. Then another thing could be fair disbursal of salaries, right? So paying fairly for the amount of work that your employees are doing. And then it could be associated with the amount of maternity benefits that you are giving to your employees. Then it could also be associated with how fair are you when if there's an employee who needs your help or is going through a lot in their personal life. So is the company or the business sensitive towards that issue, that person's struggle, whatever he or she might be going through? And are they willing to provide a helping hand, or are they willing to intervene and help him if he wants it? So if the employee is seeking out for help from the company, whether financial or otherwise, are there appropriate measures that are taken in such a case? And the retention of employees also plays a very important role. How much time does an average employee spends in a particular company? So so basically, if a company is being fair towards its employees and providing a good working atmosphere, it is generally observed that the employees tend to spend a good amount of time in that particular company, and such employee is more trusting towards the company. So that is how companies can obtain a social license from the employees. Similarly, taking care of the environment. So slowly the environmental issues are getting more and more established in the mainstream, and the community as a whole expects businesses and companies to uh, be responsible towards the environment. And sometimes if some news comes up where a company has been very polluting, or have has been seen following unsustainable practices, so the general public does not take it in a very good manner, and the trust of the company gets eroded slowly. So that's why some companies tend to include environmental issues within their CSR activities. So some companies like to do regular plantation programs, and such environmental programs regularly as a part of their CSR activity, so that people see their seriousness towards environmental issues. And that is how they slowly build a trust in the general community, and they establish a perspective of a company, which is that the company is sensitive towards environmental issues, and they are basically not ignorant towards the environment. Be transparent and accountable to stakeholders. So a company needs to be very transparent and accountable towards the stakeholders, because this is how you establish trust. If you are secretive, if you do not include the stakeholders in important decisions, it raises a lot of questions, and stakeholders might not be very trustful, or they might not trust the company. Mm. So it is important that the working procedures of the company are very transparent and accountable, and they respond well to stakeholder feedback. And whenever someone asks them, they spend their time to answer those questions as transparently as possible, so that the stakeholders do not feel alienated, and they feel that they are being included in important decisions of the company. The fourth is be a good corporate citizen. So you need to pay your basically taxes on time, and so some businesses in the past, uh, and they still do, some businesses, what they do is they outsource their work to countries where the labor laws are not very strict. So in context of sustainability, and in context of human rights and fair business practices, it is now being generally seen as a bad business practice to outsource your work to countries where the labor laws are not strict enough. Uh, and uh, a good corporate citizen also mean to give a fair amount of wages to the employees. It also means that you are fair towards other businesses also. You are not engaging into disruptive business practices. You are not being disruptive towards others who might be your competition. So you are having a healthy competition amongst different businesses, which is considered a good sign, and it is considered that this is about being a good corporate citizen. So this is another thing. And then be able to resolve issues quickly. So if, for example, if some issue comes up, it is important that the business or the company reacts to that problem, or tries to resolve it as quickly as possible. So the amount of time that that issue gets highlighted in the news or the media or otherwise in the general public, it will keep eroding the company's image, and consequently it will also erode the trust of different stakeholders, general public, and the community in that particular business. So it is advised that you react quickly towards whatever issues have come up and try to resolve them fairly, honestly. uh, the last one is act on the feedback. So yes, this is also important, as you might have guessed already, that to establish a trust. Take your example. You will so for example, if you are dealing with a company and you face some issue, and you give them a feedback that this thing is uh, not working out for me, or this is something you need to rectify. So now for example, company A, they respond to your feedback and they tell you that thank you for your feedback, and we will take the following steps to rectify this issue, and we are sorry that you had to face this. Is there anything that we can do? Or for example, they refund the amount that you have spent on that service, or they give you a free service for the next time you deal with them. So this is an example of a good feedback mechanism. On the other hand, there is a company B, and you mail to them that see, this is an issue which I have faced and this needs to be rectified, and they do not respond to you. So firstly, it will harm the business, as you are less likely to engage again with the company, and you might add up to the bad publicity for the company. And the second is that this is uh, bad for the company, in the sense that the trust will erode in the company. So these are some things that the companies are doing, and those who are not, they can do to gain trust of the stakeholders, the employees, and other community members, in order to obtain a social license to operate. So let's move on. So apart from doing good things, apart from engaging in all these good business practices, uh, these companies also want to advertise and create awareness about their deeds. Because sometimes what happens is, in the era of advertising, people who work uh, according to best business practices and who do a lot of good work do not get highlighted as much, and people who do a little bit work but advertise it in the media or through other mediums gets highlighted, and that person is more likely to obtain a social license, because the general public tends to think, be more aware about their good practices. So as it is important to work on these issues, to be fair and to engage in good business practices, to engage in trust building, it is equally important to advertise your good deeds in order to obtain that social license, because if no one knows about those good deeds, it is less likely that they are going to establish trust in the company. So yes, this is one thing. uh, what might put a social license in jeopardy? What might affect or take away your social license? So this is something which the companies realize when it's often too late. So the general trend that we have seen in the last decade is, sometimes what happens is that some news comes up with regard to a company, and they do not resolve it quickly, and they do not pay much heed to the issue, to the situation, and then they end up losing trust of the community, which is bad to the social license to operate, because any company needs a customer base basically, and if that trust erodes, you are more likely to lose that customer base. So these companies, by the time that they realize that they are losing their customer base, it is already too late, because once that trust gets eroded, it's very difficult to establish it back. So it is generally considered a good practice to pay heed to such situations, such issues, quickly, and try to rectify them as quickly as possible, so that your reputation does not get eroded. So some of the things that might destroy, or that might erode the trust of the community in the company is disasters such as oil spills. So sometimes these oil companies, they end up spilling a lot of oil in the oceans, the seas, and this is a huge negative impact on the ecosystem, and it kills so many fishes, so many birds, and you might have seen pictures of such situations. So this is something which uh, is not good. So this comes out as being irresponsible towards the environment. Another one is operating line disasters. So operating lines disasters means that someone was working on the operating line, and he met with an accident, an employee met with an accident. So this generally sends a message in the community that the company or the business is not very serious about the safety issues, about the safety of its employees, which is again a very bad image for the company. uh, Sometimes there are reports of abuse within the company. So what happens is, sometimes there are news reports of sexual abuse, or abuse, otherwise abuse of power by seniors in the company towards people who are subordinate to them. So this also is a negative impact on the company, and some companies do try to rectify this by sacking the employee, by firing that particular employee, so that their image does not get destroyed, and their seriousness about these issues is established in the general public, in the community. So and this is one thing. Sometimes it so happens that a particular person associated with a brand goes out and says something in the media, and the brand comes out and goes on to say that the views of that individual, or the views of that person, are not the views of the company, and those are their individual views. So this is when the public is reacting negatively towards the comments that that person has sent out in the general audience, and the company does not want to destroy their trust because of that one person. So this is also an example where social license to operate plays a role. Apart from this, if some companies is paying a late salary to their employees, they are not able to pay their employees on time. This also sends a bad message to the employees or the general public. Sometimes malpractices such as late payment to employees also affects a company's trust, and if they are not able to pay their employees on time, the employees might feel that the company does not feel very strongly, or is not sensitive towards its employees. They do not care about the employees. um, Also, the companies which do not take all these issues seriously also damage the reputation of the company beyond repair. So you need to take all these issues very, very seriously. Otherwise, you are putting that trust, or that image, or that reputation that you had built over time at risk, and you might end up losing the social license to operate. So, this is one thing. Increasing standards for social license to operate. So, as we are progressing, we are moving towards a world which asks for um, a good business practices, fair business practices, uh, some non-discriminatory practices, environmentally practices. So the standards for social license to operate have increased. And why am I saying so? Is because many things that were considered usual about 100 years ago are now not considered very good practices, and in fact they are banned or illegal in many parts of the world today. So, for example, child labor and unsafe working conditions was something which was a very common practices back in the days, and people did not take it very seriously because they had maybe other important, more prioritized issues to deal with. There were Hmm. There was the plague, and there were wars going on. So, child labor and unsafe working conditions was something which was at a lower priority at that time. And now, as the civil society has grown and has understood the importance, and have understood that their collective voices make a change, and collectively they can put their point forward and can get heard. uh, People are not accepting these practices. People are telling the companies and the businesses that you cannot do this. And in many parts of the world, child labor and unsafe working conditions are in fact banned. They are considered illegal. So this is how the standards for SLO, social license for to operate, have increased. So people now do not very easily digest the presence of all male executive and board members. So people expect companies to have equal number of male and females, and equal wages are paid to them. Then discriminatory hiring practices, for example, um, a company which might be discriminatory towards blacks, or a company which might be discriminatory towards hiring a particular community, or a particular people from a particular religion, might not go down well. These practices might not go down well with the community. Also, outsourcing work to regions is something which slowly is getting a lot of um, critical views from the community. Then promotion of alcohol and other intoxicants is also not considered good practices, more so because children and teenagers who are more impressionable, they get affected, and they get you know they when alcohol and other intoxicants are promoted, and in a way that these things are considered cool, or something which is in fashion, in style. So the teenagers or children are more uh, they are more inclined to use using these things, which is not a very good practice. And then brand neutrality, uh, then environmental issues is one important thing. Body shaming is also something which has been in the mainstream media for good, because now people are questioning brands who tend to advertise using very thin models. And people are now expecting brands to show, or to have models or people who are more relatable to real life people, or are more relatable to themselves, and they do not showcase unachievable body type. Basically, they do not make people feel bad about their own body. So body positivity is also something which is expected to the body positivity is also something which is expected from the business or the company. Then objectification of women also does not go down well with the audience or whatever community you are working in. And then there's animal abuse. Many makeup brands, in fact, are these days coming up with product lines which advertise themselves as being fair towards animals, and they say that they are cruelty free. So that is because they want to give a message of being uh, uh, fair towards animals, of being non-violent towards animals, because people are getting more vocal about animal issues, animal rights these days. And um, in some countries, in fact, it is important that you for a business to run, so that sometimes these social license to operate in fact become an important part of the regulatory license as well, after a sufficient amount of time has gone by. Because the regulatory bodies or the licensing authorities at some point feel that this is something which should be brought under the law, and standard below this should not be accepted. So this is how sometimes something which is a part of the social license becomes a part of the regulatory license after some amount of time has gone by. So now that you have understood the importance of social license to operate, you have understood what it is about. I hope this helped you understand the concept of social license to operate and how is it associated with sustainable business practices, sustainability as a whole. And these are some of the sources that I have referred. Uh, these are some of the sources that I have referred to. I will in, put this document from which I am teaching down below for you to refer to it, so that you can go back and read it yourself, or if you need to write it down somewhere, you can use this information for your assignment or report, or anywhere you want to quote it. So I'm going to put it down so that you can access it anytime you want. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.